Hi, I'm Michael Upchurch from Cardstock Warriors, and today we're going to take a look at the Goblin Army. As with previous videos, what we'll do is take a look at the base abilities that you'll get for playing goblins. We'll look at the abilities that you can purchase as part of your ability deck, and then we'll take a look at each individual goblin troop and see what it can do in battle. So your base deck, you'll have two uses of an ability called Forced March. What Forced March will do is in the movement phase, you'll select a goblin unit, and it will get to move an additional 4 inches. This cannot be an engage move, so this is just to get inside range. The unit will suffer a strike 3 as the brutal goblin taskmasters continue to whip their guys into a frenzy. So you'll take a little bit of damage, but you'll get an extra ability of movement to kind of get you in position to follow up with the next turn. They also have two uses of Dispel Magic, as in previous armies. Dispel Magic, when the enemy uses a magic ability with the magic keyword, you can react to that by using one of your Dispel Magics and negate the use of that ability. And finally, they have an ability called Run for the Hills. This is a reaction. They get two uses of this per game. When an enemy engages your unit, you can use this. You move half your movement speed directly away from the enemy unit. You end your movement facing away from the enemy unit, so you've ran away. The enemy does not get to make strikes for disengagement, and any other unit against them does get to make their normal disengage. So if they're already engaged in combat and they get engaged by another unit, then they can flee from the second unit, but they'll still act normally with the first one. They must pass a command check at the beginning of their next turn, or they cannot move at all while they bicker about whether to re-engage the enemy or continue to run. So it's not quite as effective as the Dwarven counterpart. Dwarves do have an ability called Flee You Fools. If you haven't seen the Dwarf video, check that out. But they do have a similar ability to run from an engagement move. So normal cards that you can just purchase as part of your Goblin Army. These are pretty fun. So they've got their standards, which is Weapon of Power and Weapon of Fury. Most armies can buy these. That's an additional +1 of their strike rolls with the Weapon of Power, or an additional +3 strike with the Weapon of Fury. They have an ability called Press of Tiny Little Bodies. So as you may notice, the Goblin Army is quite a bit larger than some of the other forces. They're cheaper. So one of their main benefits is their ability to outnumber the enemy. Press of Tiny Little Bodies. You choose an engaged Goblin unit. You get to roll a d6 and add that number when determining combat results. So it kind of compounds their typical outnumbering, helps them add more fuel to that fire. They have Magic Gateway. This is a movement ability. This is a keyword magic, so it can be dispelled. But a powerful Goblin Shaman is watching the battle from afar. He opens the Magic Gateway and allows one of your units to step through. What that means is that you can pick up the unit and place it anywhere within 15 inches of its current location, in any facing. This can happen at any point. Remember, you can engage at any point. So this can actually happen prior to an engagement move. So you can pick them up, place them somewhere else, and engage from that direction. So this is an incredibly powerful ability, but you're going to want to draw out your enemy's dispels before you use it. Also, there's Green Lightning. This is an additional magic. So a powerful Goblin Shaman calls in natural lightning from the skies. You choose an unengaged enemy unit and roll a d6. On a 2+, you get to strike 8 against that unit. 8's a pretty good strike value. However, on a 1, somebody stole the Shaman's girlfriend before the battle started, and he's kind of pissed off about it. So your opponent actually gets to choose one of your units. The Shaman electrifies those guys, trying to get the jerk that stole his girlfriend. So, finally, we've got Energize. This is an expensive card. It's used in a combat phase. It does have keyword magic. So again, try and draw out those dispels if you can. In this case, the Goblin Gods energize the soldiers that are placed in combat. You choose your unit and you add +1 to its strike value for each wound counter remaining. So again, if you've got a unit of 20 guys and you use this on a full unit, you're going to add 20 to your strike value. At the end of the turn, however, your guys may get a little tired from hitting so hard or so fast. And so after all combat is resolved, they will strike against itself for half of those wounds. And the defense counts as 4. So basically, you're going to lose half your guys, all odds being even. Finally, there's 2 reaction cards that are pretty cool. One of them is a Goblin Assassin. So this is when your enemy plays a combat card. And traditionally, combat cards are things like magic weapons, their Weapon of Power, Weapon of Fury. Those are both played in the combat phase. What happens here is that a Goblin Assassin darts out, kills the enemy soldier with whatever that ability is, and eliminates them from the battle. So you are countering the play of the card. So for an example, Dwarf says, I'm going to use Weapon of Fury. My hero has a magic weapon. And you go, cool story. Goblin Assassin, I just killed your guy with a magic weapon and you don't get your benefit. So that's what that one does. And finally, you've got Power Drain. This is when an enemy plays a magic card. You and your opponent will then roll a dice, and if you beat or meet your opponent's score, you will dispel the magic, just like a dispel card. So goblins can take additional ability to attempt to stop enemy magic from happening. So if you're playing against a witch player, you're probably going to want to take, some of those. So those are your basic goblin abilities. And now we'll walk through the Goblin Army and take a look at what all these troops can do. All right, so the first unit that we're going to look at here is your Goblin Spears. These guys are pretty inexpensive for fairly high strike value. They have strike 6, their defense is 4, which is average. 50% of the time they are going to die. Command 2, very low, speed 10. They have no special abilities, and they do have distress values that bring most of those down, except for the speed. So those are your pretty basic stock Goblin troops. Cheap, inexpensive, decently hard-hitting, and easy to kill. That pretty much characterizes your Goblin Army. In front there, of course, you can see our Kickstarter exclusive. So if you haven't downloaded that one yet, check the Kickstarter updates. You'll want to go to the page reference there and pull that down while the Kickstarter is still active. If you're watching this after the Kickstarter, sorry to hear that. You're going to miss out on this Bannerman, but thanks for watching anyway. Following up, we've got back here our Dwarven Warriors, all little demon hats they got on there. They're pretty hardcore. These guys are covered in armor, so their defense is actually fairly high for a goblin. It goes up to 5. Strike is lower than the spears. They are actually less expensive because they don't hit as hard. But they are the anvil to the hammer, which is the spears. So they're going to stick around in combat longer, but do a lot less damage. Next up, we have the Goblin Bomb Squad. So these are these little guys right here. Goblin prisoners that have broken the little goblin laws, goblin rules, whatever. They get a chance to redeem themselves in battle. They have strike 0, so they don't actually strike in combat. Their defense is 5 because they're in a scattered formation. Command 0, speed 11, they're pretty fast. They have an ability called Bombs Away, so they can choose an unengaged enemy unit within 10 inches in front quadrant, and you strike 6, so you throw your dynamite into the unit. They're in loose formation, so they never distress. They never add strike values for having an additional line of soldiers. And then they have a final ability called It's Over Anyway. So they suck real bad in combat, but you can remove as many wound counters from the squad as you wish in the combat phase, and then you strike D3 times against the enemy for each wound removed. Those strikes are at +1, so more or less they detonate themselves once they get in combat. Poor little fellers. Next up, we have the Goblin Archers. These guys are wearing their cool little Robin Hood hats. Thinking they're pretty pro back there. They have strike 3, defense 3, no armor, very easy to kill. They do have a high speed, which is 11. They're extremely cheap for 15 points for 10 wounds, which is pretty good. They do have an ability called Let Fly. They choose an unengaged unit within 20 inches, front quadrant, line of sight, like most of the ranged attacks, and they strike 4. So they do a decent amount of range damage, but they die pretty quickly. They're really good for messing up movement lanes, standing in front of your troops, soaking up damage, just being a cheap filler, as well as peppering lightly armored enemy units along the way. Next up, you've got your Goblin Ward Cavalry. That's these wolf riding guys right here. They're pretty cool. They are nice. They've got 5 wounds. They're 30 points, so they're a little more expensive than a block of 20. So a lot less wounds than that. They have strike 6. Their defense is 4, which sounds pretty low, but they are mounted, so they half the number of successful hits when determining how many wound counters to remove. So if I strike against them and only do 1, I actually do nothing. I have to do at least 2 to kill a single unit. If I do 4, it's 2. If I do 6, it's 3, etc. So they're a lot more resilient than they sound. They do have distress values. Their speed is 15, so they're pretty quick. They have vicious fangs, so on any round of combat that they engaged, which means that that is the turn that they have attacked the enemy, they add +1 to their strike rolls, so they hit hard. And they have a cool ability called Hit and Run. This is twice per game on a turn that they engage. For each wound that they do in combat, their enemy loses a strike. So what this means is if they go in and do 6 wounds, the enemy is at -6 strike when they strike back. Hopefully, they can do enough damage to the enemy that they're not actually getting hit back at all. Then they may disengage from the enemy and move up to 12 inches, ending with any facing that they want. The enemy unit does not get to strike for the disengage. So twice per game, these guys can get in, do damage, take very minimal damage back, and get out and reposition. so they're really good with hit and run tactics. Next to them, we've got this Goblin Chariot. So this one is one of my favorite models that I've drawn so far. They have a strike 5, defense 5, command 3. Their speed is 10, so they're going to move at basically the same speed as the rest of your infantry. They do have 2 abilities, Devastating Charge, which is on the round that they engage. They get an additional +5 strike, and those 5 strike attacks are at an additional +2 to hit. So again, on the engage, they do a lot more damage than they do standard. So you're going to want to go in with them and the wolves at the same time if you can concert them with your War Riders or with another unit that's got a lot of wounds to really boost your combat resolution. Do a lot of damage, taking off a lot of wound counters, have a bunch of wounds from your unit that you've attacked with, and they do a lot of damage in combat. They also have a Goblin Sharpshooter that rides in the chariot. They can strike 2 against any unit within 15 inches that you can draw an uninterrupted line to. So this is line of sight, not necessarily in your front quadrant. The Sharpshooter is free to shoot off any side of the chariot, so that one's pretty fun. Next up, we've got our Goblin Catapult back here in the back. These guys are your standard type of war machine. They have a defense of 4/6, 6 being their rule, hide against the machine, which increases their defense to 6 if they're not engaged. They have an ability called Somewhere over there. If the catapult has not moved this turn, they can choose an unengaged enemy unit within 30 inches that they can see. That's front quadrant, uninterrupted line from their base to the enemy base. They roll a d6, and on a 4+, they strike 8 against the unit. On a 2 or 3, you choose a target within 6 inches of your original target. So you hit close, but not quite, and you can strike 4. And on a 1, you've missed completely. Your opponent can declare it a miss, or they can choose any unit within 12 inches and strike 8 against that. Any unit within 12 inches, not necessarily theirs. More than likely it's going to be yours, or they're going to declare it a miss. So those can backfire, but they're pretty cool. You got your Goblin Troll Guard, and that's these guys right here. These are fun. They have strike 6. Their defense is 6. They're hard to kill. They have a command of 3/0, and their speed is 8. We'll talk about that slash in just a minute. They do have distress values for when the front rank is dead. They have an ability called Lead Them to Battle. So your 3 troll wound counters are deployed in the back rank, and you have their 5 goblins in the front. The wounds are dealt to the goblins first. When all the goblins are gone, they have a command of 0, and they must engage an enemy if they can. That's very similar to the vampire rule if you've watched the Witch Kingdoms video. If not, I recommend you check that out. They also have a rule called Invincible, which is a bit of a misnomer. They're not actually invincible. But when a wound is dealt, you roll a d6, and on a 5+, it does not occur. And that is for all wounds against the Troll Guard unit, of which they have only 8 there. Tough Mothers, they're only distressed when there is 1 troll remaining. So they keep their standard stat line, with the exception of the command value when your goblins are dead. Until they have only 1 troll remaining. And then they have Powerful Limbs, which allows them to add +1 to their strike rolls. So they hit pretty hard. Next up, we have the Goblin Mega Spear, which is a less effective form of the Dwarven Bolt Throwers. The goblins stole the design. Not quite as good, but you do what you can. They have an ability called Enemy Kebabs, which allows them to fire within 25 inches, target they can see, front arc, uninterrupted line, etc. You strike 2 at +2. That is a rare machinery, so no more than 2 per 50 points. A lot less common than the Dwarven counterparts. And that is a basic overview of your Goblin Army. So next up, we're going to take a quick peek and see what a 350 point Goblin force looks like, because this is much, much larger than that. So stick with me, and we'll take a look at that in just a minute. All right, so what we are looking at here is a basic 350 point Goblin force. As you can see, I have opted to purchase mostly infantry and more inexpensive options, causing this armor to be quite a bit larger than some of the other 350 point forces that are available. So what I have done, I've got 3 spear units because they put out a good amount of damage, as well as 2 of the standard warrior units, which I'm going to use to attempt to keep my enemy in check. I've got very little in the way of ranged, but it did take a little bit, so I've got 3 of these Goblin Archer units. I'm going to use them primarily to soak up damage, block engagement lanes, and basically be a nuisance to the enemy. Same thing with my bomb squads. I'm going to use them just to kind of get in the middle of the enemy, distract them, cause them to move in ways that are not good for my opponent. And then I'm going to use my bolt thrower back here, or mega spear, to attempt to do damage to any of their really heavy-hitting units. I'm probably going to take at least a couple instances of Magic Gateway or some other Magic cards to try and get a clean use of Magic Gateway to push these trolls behind the enemy lines if possible. I'm also going to use my Warg Riders here to really move forward as quickly as I can, take out enemy war machines or enemy ranged units that are going to cause me problems, or take away my numbers prior to my engagement. I really want to have as much of those 3 spear units and 2 warrior units as possible when I begin to engage the enemy. And again, my heavy hitters are going to be my chariot and my troll guard back here in the back. I'm going to want them to do the most amount of close combat damage once we actually get engaged. So that is a quick look at a 350 point force for goblins. Check out the other videos for features on the other armies. And again, if you have not yet gone to the Kickstarter, check us out on Kickstarter. It's Cardstock Warriors, and please back us. So thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time.